You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hey there, listeners. Carlton here from Life in Ruins Podcast. Just to let you guys know, we have a lot of subjects that we talk about on this episode that you're probably not familiar with. So to make things easier, we've added resources on our Instagram account as well as our website for you to follow along. So we have the picture that Bernie Taylor talks about, as well as a bunch of different resources, his website Before Orion, and as well as his books, as well as other resources that you can use to follow along with the episode in your free time. So please, 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 please be a scientific citizen and do your research just so you can have a more critical idea of what you're listening to and how to interpret it for yourselves. Don't just listen to me, David and Connor. Don't just listen to Mr. Taylor, but listen to both perspectives and do your own research. Well, thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Later. Welcome to episode 14 of a Life in Ruins podcast. I'm your host, Carlton Gover, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Connor Johnen and David Howe. Tonight's guest is author Bernie Taylor. Bernie Taylor is an independent author who explores what he describes as the mythological connections and biological knowledge among prehistoric peoples. His books include Biological Time, published in 2004, and Before Orion, Finding the Face of the Hero, in 2017. Through his writing, Bernie suggests that the El Castillo cave in Spain contains fundamental pieces in the human journey to self-realization, the foundation of written language, and a record of biological knowledge that irrevocably impacted some of the artistic styles, religious practices, and stories that are still with us. Bernie found David through David's public outreach, and the two began to talk about their mutual interest in dogs. Bernie believes there are images of domestic dogs in El Castillo cave. After some discussion, Bernie asked to continue this conversation on the podcast, and we are continuing that discussion today. Thank you for joining us, Bernie. How are you doing this evening?
Well, I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having this show. We're going to have a good time tonight, explore some different ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you start by giving, we gave a kind of an introduction to who you are. Can you give us a background to
Absolutely.
who you are?
Sure. So I live in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, metro area. Been out here for more than 20, maybe 25 years, originally from the East Coast. I have what you want to know is I have a social sciences background, okay, which makes me, I would say, moderately qualified to look at Paleolithic cave art. I believe that the most qualified people to do this are from the humanities. Interesting, right? So if you walk into a Paleolithic cave, and it's obvious, you can walk in, it's uncovered, and you can see with the naked eye. You're looking at it from perspective as an artist, which is the humanities. Perhaps so Picasso walked into the caves, and has most quotes in world history about the cave art. You could walk in as Joseph Campbell did, who came out and said these are myths because there's an organization of the characters. Some people have walked in and said we see astronomical patterns. Archaeology is very good at dating cave art. I mean, and exploring, let's say, the depths and the artifacts to tell us the history of the timeline. But the other areas, the humanities, are what's most strongest, because the humanities, I would also include social sciences in terms of psychology.
Sure.
They bring out what did people think about? What do people look at the cave walls and recognize that we see today? What do they feel about that we feel today? So these are all I would describe as non-scientific hard science studies. These are the next step forwards. So how did I get into this? About 13 years ago, I wrote Biological Time, which was about chronobiology, how do plants and animals time themselves? And I worked in conjunction with Oregon Fish and Wildlife, but we're looking at the concept of salmon. Salmon in the Pacific Northwest run earlier or later from one year to the next, in about a 1 month window. But what's unique about them is that they all run early or late together. So they either follow one smart salmon or there's some other mechanism. And up and down the entire Oregon-Washington coast, they actually run early or late the same together. So we explored that concept, did field research, went out and collected data, all that sort of stuff. And we came up with a methodology that you could predict the salmon timing within a day or two, whereas previously you couldn't predict it at all, okay, within a month or so. And I gave presentations to academic conferences, universities, fish and wildlife agencies, the tribes. That was really important. Went to the Columbia Basin tribes, spoke before all the tribal councils. I had Native Americans crying. And someone said to me, that if this mechanism of the timing of the salmon, which also applies to deer, elk, and other animals, is apparent today, perhaps it was in our distant past. And that same person said, you should go look at the images in the Paleolithic caves of France. And so I looked at images at Lascaux 17,000 years ago, and lo and behold, the timing of the animals was exactly the same as the Native American calendars, and biologically how these animals time themselves. With chronobiology, biological clocks.
Hey, can you start?
What do you mean by
there?
Native American calendars?
Yeah, and how can you tell that in the archaeological record and on these cave paintings? Good
question. So there's in the Lascaux cave, there's a huge red deer. Some people say it's a megaloceros, could be either one. It's, under the megaloceros red deer, there's a box, and there's 13 dots leading to the box. In Native American traditions, they hunted around the full moon. They hunted around the full moon because the animals group together when there's more light. It has nothing to do with the gravitationals and tides or anything like that. It's entirely due to the animals are up and about at night because the lights are on. The natural lights are on. So the animals group together. They also rut together around the full moon because it brings the animals together. And that's in Native American calendars for deer and elk across our country. Now, the key thing is that it's always around the full moon because that's what they draw together. Whereas around the new moon, the dark nights, they're spaced out. And so how people around the world count is they start the lunar count within the cycle. So they start with that first crescent moon. And they count from 13 to the full moon. It's called the ecclesiastical full moon. And it's just how everybody counts the moon. It's the easiest way to do it. And well, this pattern of 13 is not just under that megaloceros red deer, but it's under other large animals, ibex, it's other deer in the Lascaux cave, but it's also depicted in Native American cave art or wall art in the Pacific Northwest and in their own calendars. So we have a biological phenomenon, or actually biological activity, that is the same timing mechanism as these red deer. And what's unique about this red deer is it's blowing kind of like a circlish pattern from its mouth, and its neck is up and it has a full rack. So it's full antlers. So it's a rutting scene where this red deer is bugling in the morning to call in the cows. So we can not just to time it as any month of the year or lunation of the year, but it's an actual biological activity within a season of the year. And it's exactly how Native Americans timed their hunts, as well as the rutting of the deer.
These caves are periodically reoccupied by multiple people.
Correct.
There's hundreds, up to hundreds of thousands of years. How do you take that into account?
Thousands of years, yeah.
10 to 20,000 years. How do you take that into account that these things are first connected? And second, how they're not a product of multiple times being there?
Well, actually, there's multiple caves. And what you're asking now is you're asking an archaeology question. So how the archaeologists determine the timing, they actually can't time when people are in the caves. They can time when the images were made. It's a different concept. So the way to time someone's in a cave, you look at layers of soil.
Yeah. Exactly.
But the images are timed differently. And so,
right.
So the most common method, let's call it the state-of-the-art method for dating cave art now, is that most of these panels are on limestone walls. And when the limestone percolates out, it becomes calcium carbonate. When the calcium carbonate goes on top of a cave image, you can say is at least as old as that excretion of the calcium carbonate, which is datable using uranium method. So it could be a day older, or it could be 10,000 years older. And you recently, last week, it came out in Science or Nature about the Indonesian cave art at being about 43 years ago.
As Nature.
Yeah. And that was timed with the same method. So it was at least 43,000 years ago. Now, what the author of that study knew is that there's cave art in Spain at the El Castillo mountain that was dated to 40,000 years ago. At a minimum age, that could be a day older than the one in Indonesia. So having found this concept of the oldest cave art is really a minimum dating. And so so archaeologists, what they try to do is have multiple multiple data points on a wall. And if they're within, if they're fairly close to each other, they'll say that this is pretty good to be about 40,000 years ago. So that's an archaeology question. And that technique came out about 7 years ago. And what the archaeologists did in Europe is they went around and they kind of tested everybody's ideas of what people thought the ages were. And there were winners and losers in this one. Okay. And,
right.
And so the so-called losers who didn't have as old as people thought it was, so the archaeologists thought it was, they haven't changed their papers yet, or on Wikipedia and so on. But it's a game of who's the oldest. But the oldest is really it's a speculative. It's good data, but it's a speculative data point.
Right. And I'd like just to real quick add a couple things.
Sure.
Other dating techniques include dating charcoal
yes.
in these caves, which
yes.
are evidence of human behavior. That's a big one because the uranium method, the standard deviations are larger because the half-life of uranium is much broader
Correct.
than of carbon. And one thing that I find interesting, so Lascaux Caves, 12,000 years old in France, and you're using historic hunting methodologies of American Indian tribes in the United States
yes.
to help inform what's going on. And just, not all the tribes that are found in their historic ranges are traditionally prehistorically from these ranges.
Correct. Well, none of the Native Americans would be from the Lascaux region because Native Americans were
exactly. They're not even from France.
24,000 years ago. Yeah. So Lascaux was 17,000 years ago. So the Native Americans didn't change. People in Siberia didn't change. Native Americans may have had changes. People in Siberia may have had changes, as the people in Paleolithic, the Magellan people in Spain and France. But the animals didn't change. So our observation of the animals doesn't change. And so the red deer and the megaloceros rutted in their same own biological timing through that whole period. And
right, as most animals do, that it's usually coincided with spring and fall. And this is, I honestly find it fascinating because it's not much of a question of the data. It's really a question of how we interpret.
Correct.
To interpret these. And this is what you bring up with the humanities, that the humanities might be able to help understand these things. And that's where it gets, and unfortunately, in terms of academia, we hole ourselves and put our feet down in these certain camps. But when it comes to things like art and cave art, none of us were around then.
Correct.
No one that we know was around then. So we're trying to use our modern day interpretations to help inform us of prehistoric mental spaces and how they thought. And that's the interesting part of this whole dynamic, because fundamentally everyone agrees on the dates. They agree relatively, what these things represent, because these aren't, canon images. These are paintings. Mm-hmm. And that's, so fundamentally, that's why we're excited to have you on the show. It's that you offer these very interesting perspectives that are based in a different paradigm than what we usually associate ourselves with or are familiar to.
So that's where I started. Okay, that was biological time, and I gave lots of did the conference route and taught classes and so on. Actually, guest lecture classes, right? And then I put it down for 10 years, and I came back and I was going to do kind of an upgrade, just write a paper about what I had noticed since other cave art had been dated to older time. And I started looking at the El Castillo cave and the so-called Gallery of Discs, which had been put at about 34,000 years ago with this new uranium series dating. And I started counting the red discs in the same way as I did at Lascaux and other caves in Europe. And I just sat back in the chair once and I started looking, oh my God, that looks like an elephant. And, so the ear and the trunk's up.
For the audience listening, I would Google right now, if you can, El Castillo Cave in Spain, so you can see the images that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, it's Gallery of Discs, El Castillo Cave. And above the elephant, what appeared to be an elephant, I actually thought I was kind of making this up. It looked like a lion. And I said, okay, wait a second. Now, this lion apparently didn't have it had a mane, whereas the other images of lions in Europe, had they were bald of sorts. They didn't have manes. And then there were some other unusual characters. So I reached out to someone from my distant past. I'm 55 now. My mid-20s, I lived in Beijing, China. And through a mutual friend back then, I met George Schaller. And George Schaller is considered the world's foremost field wildlife biologist. And he's the mentor of Jane Goodall and everybody else. So I contacted George completely out of the blue. He's mid 80s now. And I said, George, I'm looking at these images. This is the time period. This what appears to me, is this an elephant and is this a lion? And he kind of looked it over and he said, well, it could be an elephant. He said, well, it also could be a woolly mammoth. He said, I don't, what are woolly mammoths, both juveniles and adults look like? And so we went back and forth. And then as we're doing that, other animals started popping out.
Are these animals popping out in the sense that they've been painted on, or is this natural formations in the rock art? Because I'm going to be honest, that's what I see.
Yeah. So if you look at if you look at the panel, it's you see 2/3 of it is white limestone with red and black on top. Okay. The natural state of that panel should be all the dark matter that you see in the top third. Okay, so what they did was they took off let's call it the brown matter, and then they literally, I don't want to say etched out, but they and I don't want to say chiseled either because they didn't have chisels, right? But they scraped out layers of it. So you're looking in the gallery disc it's the Pedro Suarez image that you can see.
Sure,
it's actually. It should be like multi-dimensional. And a lot of those lines that you see are actually multiple layers. So everything below the brown is entirely fabricated. Okay, so by either...
Oh, I see what you're talking about. They did this at Chauvet Cave with the panels. They scrape off the top limestone.
In the Chauvet Cave, it's the panel of dots, the red dots.
Yeah,
it's the same thing exactly. And by the way, the Chauvet, I didn't put the Chauvet Cave, the panel of dots in the book, but it has a similar themes to what you're looking at on this.
No, you're talking about El Castillo.
So we're back to El Castillo Gallery of Discs. Okay, and so everything white should not be white. It was scraped off to become the limestone that you see. It's not its natural state.
Are there other studies that? So you said earlier, one of our questions was, have you been to this cave yourself?
I have not been.
Have you?
I've seen the images in and around. I've seen all the images from the cave, and I've seen the ones on both sides of this. So as soon as you leave that white area, you're in brown. So the natural state is the brownish material.
Sure.
Yeah.
And did you get this notion that these images were carved out of the natural rock from a paper, or was this your like summation?
Yeah,
from
so actually
this picture?
I had no knowledge prior to seeing the elephant that there was anything but red discs on that wall. At that time I had no knowledge.
Okay.
I've since come to find other documentation from the past that people had been here, they'd seen the images. But I had no knowledge of it. So I contacted George.
Okay.
So
no published studies.
There were no published. Well, there was one in 1600 or so, So I had no knowledge. So contacting George Schaller is like asking Tiger Woods, "How's my stroke?" And Tiger could say to you, you got some potential, or you maybe should try, miniature golf. And so I took a huge risk going to George. And George, he scratched his head and says, kind of looks like an elephant. Well, after probably 30 animals later and hundreds of emails going back and forth, we resolved that it wasn't elephant, but we actually couldn't decide what it was, either a European elephant, because there were elephants at that time in Europe, or an African elephant. We couldn't decide that. But we found other animals that were from Europe and other animals and Africa, and marine animals. And
at that time, my and I'll reveal this, like my understanding of Pleistocene megafauna in Europe, or their demographics, is not as good as it is for North America. But were there still mammoths running around that area during that time?
Yeah, there were mammoths. Now the difference. Now George and I, we went back and forth on this, and I showed him a picture of a mammoth. The mammoths had like that humped head. And there's actually 4 images of elephants on that panel, and they all have flat heads like an African elephant. The Pacific elephant or Asian elephant, I should say, has a humped head, something like a woolly mammoth. So then George asked me, well, I don't know maybe it could be a juvenile woolly mammoth. And so we found the image of the baby Luba out of Siberia, and lo and behold, juvenile woolly mammoths have a humped head just like an adult one. And so we still weren't completely, he wasn't completely decided. And it wasn't until later that we found, many more animals.
We're going to stop you there. We're going to end this first session, and we can continue on in the second,
sure,
just as a time management thing. So yeah, this has been episode 14 of Life in Ruins with Bernie Taylor. We'll catch you on the far side.
And we're back to segment 2 with Bernie Taylor of episode 14 of a Life in Ruins podcast. All right. So where do we want to kick back off, guys?
Red discs.
All right, let's talk about red discs. And these are the red discs in El Castillo cave, or are we also going to be talking about another cave as well?
We can actually talk about, primarily the El Castillo cave. We're going to talk about red in general, because that's the essence of it all.
Now, would you agree that the red discs of El Castillo date to about 40,000 based on the U-series dating?
So the U-series is running at 34,000 for the gallery of discs and around 40,000 for the panel of hands, which is a different chamber.
And this, you made a YouTube video about red in general on your YouTube channel before Orion. Yeah, so it's about a minute long. So for our viewers or listeners, you guys should check out this YouTube video so that way you guys get more of a background of what we're talking about. It's only a minute long. So the color red.
So earlier I said that I was looking at the cave image, Pedro Suarez image that's widely available. You can find it. And I was counting the red discs, just like everybody else. How many were there? What do they mean? All that sort of stuff. Because that was the uranium series data came out that pushed El Castillo back to 40,000 years ago. The big story was, what does the red disc mean? And so I was counting red discs, just like everybody else. And I went back a little further into my studies. In the past, I thought about red. And there was Nicholas Tinbergen won a Nobel Prize, or shared a Nobel Prize for his work in the study of instinct. And Tinbergen had a 3-spine stickleback tank, a tank with 3-spine sticklebacks near his window. And every day that a red delivery truck came by and stopped outside the windows, the sticklebacks went into a defensive posture. And Tinbergen theorized that since the sticklebacks and fish in general are brainstem dominated, it was an instinctual reaction that not just fish should respond to, but we do as well. So when you drive down the highway, no one stops for a blue sign or a green sign because it blends into our natural world. We stop for that red sign. It's naturally alerting to us in the same way as a stickleback. If you drive the main strip in your town, what do you see that's red?
Stoplights, stop signs.
I see a lot of yellow.
Yeah.
Yellow too. The other end of the spectrum, you see McDonald's, you see Burger King, you see Dairy Queen. So Madison Avenue picked up on the red a long time ago, and they're using it to trigger our brains at the most basic level to say, look at me, stop, get a burger.
You from Long Island, Bernie?
I'm from originally Babylon area.
Okay, I'm from Islip. Cool. You mentioned Madison Avenue, so I was like, oh, he's from New York too.
But yeah, it's at the most basic level. So the red disc, I believe part of it was a test. Can you see beyond the red disc? Can you see the forest through the trees? And it wasn't, I was like everybody else, I was counting the red discs. And that's why I didn't see the elephant in the room. And so George and I, we continued down finding all these animals. And on one end of the panel, let's say to the viewer's left, there's a giraffe. And on the viewer's right, there's a horse. And these are both, on the viewer's right, there's also an Iberian lynx and some other European animals. Those are animals that were distinctly from the two different continents, Africa and Europe. And in between those, we found marine animals. There's a seal, there's a dolphin, there's a whale.
And this is from your identification, right? Just want to make sure that we're...
Yeah, this is from our identification. Okay. And they're all, and people go to my webpage beforeorion.com, you can see, people could see for themselves.
And I also want to backtrack a little bit and then say that these are these red discs, they're originally made out of ochre. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're made of red ochre, yes.
Okay. Just so our viewers understand that.
Yeah, next time you guys are flipping through a Paleolithic cave art book and you see red discs, take a deeper look because it's the test.
I'm trying to look. So Paleolithic. So we're talking about like European Paleolithic.
So you're looking
like
12,000
today
past 40,000.
So okay. And are we confining that to like, because most of this talk so far is European rock art.
It's
so we're looking at the European Paleolithic, 12,000 and beyond. Okay. So, and then also that just for the listeners, like ochre is a naturally recurring, is it a mineral? Basically it's like hematite. Degraded iron. Yeah. It's hematite, degraded, and it's easy to make paint out of. And you see ochre used globally.
Yes. In a spiritual context.
You can find it. Yes, that too.
Yeah,
that is also,
And that's amazing. So why around the world, I don't believe it's just a brainstem dominated reaction why we were attracted to the red ochre. I believe that at a deeper point in time, we used it spiritually. Now, and I'm not a spiritual person, but we come from a spiritual source. And that's what makes this interesting, is that we're now going back so far deep in time.
What do you mean
I'm
by
not a spiritual person.
What do you mean by like
we come from a spiritual source?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Sorry.
So people prior to 6,000 years ago were animistic. People that they believed that the mountains were gods. They believed that the wind had a voice. They believed that they could talk to animals and the animals would talk to them. So an animist would be very similar to Native Americans when we arrived. Okay, and so if you look at Native American literature or folklore or myth, you'll find that people interacted with the animals. They spoke with the animals, listened to the animals, and before people arrived, the animals talked with each other. And so that's the spiritual source that we all come from, and we still carry it within us. You know, have any of you guys ever said, someone is as smart as an owl?
Well, in Pawnee beliefs, owls are the devil, so we don't use that in my household.
Okay.
But I get what you're saying. And like also like it's important to realize that, like, especially with American Indian beliefs, there's over 562 tribes and more state tribes, and not all of, it's easy to talk about these things homogeneously.
Correct.
And there's still differences in which they conduct their own spiritual ceremonies. And like the comment that I had is like, when people still, it's not necessarily talking. And this is coming from my point of view, the way that I've been told, it's not necessarily talking, but that animals communicate, not necessarily in a voice context, but their behaviors communicate events that are going on in time and space. So like you said, like when an elk is rutting or when the bears start to get fatter, fall's coming. So they're in that kind of context, how animals are communicating, and how people can, understanding animal behavior, can use those interpretations to help inform them of environmental conditions.
That is exactly true, and that is my observation with Native Americans, Pacific Northwest. So it's communicating with maybe listening to or watching the behavior of the animal, and there's typically a myth associated with that might explain how it all came to be, if the myth still exists. But yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for putting that in there. So we go back this far in time, 36,000 years ago, and if we have African animals, we're not just talking about Europe. We're talking about at least Western North Africa, and we're finding at this point, let's say, a common spiritual source, because people in Indonesia could have come out of, they definitely went through North Africa, and they could have intersected with people that were in Western North Africa. And so what we're finding is, for the first time, is these, let's call it spiritual characters that possibly connect to who we are today. Did any of you guys study Joseph Campbell when you're in high school or college?
All right, the hero's journey.
I had a 2.33 repeating GPA in high school. I didn't do a goddamn thing.
Okay. So Joseph Campbell was the easy one, okay? And what Joseph Campbell said is that there's a common myth, because he says, Joseph Campbell said, people all around the world fundamentally tell the same story of a hero that goes on his journey. And if you somehow kidnap somebody from China who knew nothing about Western literature and told them the story of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, the Chinese person would say, that sounds a lot like Journey to the West. because there's common elements in these stories, and that's what Joseph Campbell recognized. And Joseph Campbell said, two things could have happened. One is that this story is so deep in time that we all intersect with it, or that it was dispersed, sort of a hyper dispersion, more recently in time in the, let's say, 6,000 years ago. Okay. That's what Joseph Campbell said. And that is one hypothesis. And there's another hypothesis that came out of Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. And Jung said is that we have common archetypes. So in an image, if you see a woman in distress, you recognize she's in distress and you feel for her. If you see a teacher, a man speaking to the ear of a young boy, as we find in this gallery of this image, you associate the teacher and the apprentice. So the old and the young.
So,
and these are archetypal characters.
So you're saying that you saw this in not El Castillo, it's in a different place specifically? Sorry, I just need to contextualize.
Yeah, actually. So on the gallery of discs, we have the teacher and the apprentice, which is it's down to, from the viewer's side, it'd be down to the viewer's right.
Yeah, the bottom right in El Castillo.
Bottom right, yeah. It's the most common image that I use in my videos and my presentations. Yeah, it jumps out. And that, by the way, I find that same motif in other caves.
What caves are those?
The Gorham's Cave, the Gorham etching has one, as well as the Chauvet panel of dots.
And
yeah,
okay.
It's at the top. It's at the top. But yeah, it's not in the book because I didn't get permission to use that image for the book.
Sure. When you meet with other archaeologists and other, I guess, humanities researchers, what is their general reception of this art?
Well, they're amazed. And they're not amazed that it's there, but they're amazed that that it pushes back mythology. So prior to my work, the oldest myth of time was the Epic of Gilgamesh, 4,500 years ago, dug up in the sands of Iraq. And Gilgamesh had all the same fundamental problems that we have.
That's written myth, right?
He was an awful person.
Myth. Okay,
that's written, exactly, written myth, yeah. So in due respect to the Pawnee, okay? So that is written myth. So that's only what we can actually date versus since time immemorial, okay? I believe that the Native American myths are much older than the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay? So good point. So Gilgamesh, people had looked at Gilgamesh and said, well, that's that earliest story, and psychologically we haven't changed since then. So now they can see the images, and it pushes back the concept of the story of the hero and the hero's journey, the teacher and the apprentice, and these other characters. It says that we had this same story going back at least 34,000 years ago. Therefore, the psychology of man hasn't changed very much, which makes sense. So, this is a big thumbs up for Native Americans. Is that so? The common, let's say, anthropological DNA point where we are now is people in Beringia about 24,000 years ago, and somewhere 15 to 16,000 years ago they started migrating down to the lower North America. Okay, something like that. Okay, and so if people were in Beringia 24,000 years ago, well, that is of a earlier date than let's go at 17,000 years ago. So if Native Americans can have that fundamentally the same structure of the myth, is what Joseph Campbell said, then it dates back so far in time before Lisco. Therefore, everybody should have these fundamental myth structure. And this proves out Joseph Campbell pushing it back, let's say beyond the 22,000 years of Beringia to 34,000 years ago. And so the question is then asked, it's really humanity's question and psychology. Why do we have the common myth? Is the myth in us? And when the archetypal characters are found, is the myth evoked? Or what Joseph Campbell said, we carry down the same myth story from early in time. So what do the Pawnee say? That's the question. Where does the myth come from? Is the myth within us, or was the myth passed down?
I think it's passed down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because also the Pawnee populations, the Native American populations that we know of today really started forming around 1500 at the end of the medieval global warming period. So before that, we're not quite sure how their populations were structured, but also it's not unheard of for humans to to develop technologies and stories independently from one another. We see that with like the bow and arrow. It's developed. They didn't, American Indians did not come across Beringia with it. They're the bow and arrow in Europe and North America. They're developed independently from one another. So it's not like necessarily unheard of that there's these fundamental evolutions in terms of human technology, and technology itself just being an expression of human psychology or human mental templates. It's fascinating, and it just comes back to what we talked about in that first section. It's like, these concepts, because there's no evidence in the sense of like there's no material remains left behind. Correct. Right? Like it's not like arrowheads or the paintings. It's like that's what's interesting about these topics. It's like they're abstract, and in archaeology we've seen a shift towards looking at these more with the post-processual paradigm in our field, where more abstract ideas are being investigated, and the traditional Binfordian techniques of archaeology are being labeled as processual. So yeah, it's like really, we can all talk about these things, but it's also like, it's fascinating. It honestly is fascinating.
So you earlier asked the question, what do people of humanities think when they see these images? And they say it's fascinating because we have an actual journey. We can see that we have a character that he starts in the Iberian Peninsula. We have a water area. We have this marine animals, and we have African animals. So it goes from the Iberian Peninsula, the northern part of Spain, across the Strait of Gibraltar to Africa and back again to retell the story. And so,
in one video, you said you saw that there were giraffes in this cave art too.
Yes, you should be able to see the head of the giraffe without me outlining it for you. If you look to your left, the far left center, it looks like a deer, and it's the head is on its side. I have images in my presentations which show the giraffe. So actually, there's two giraffes. Sure. There's a mother giraffe, and then there's a juvenile which wraps its head around the mother's neck. And the red discs at that part of the panel become the molted pattern of the mother giraffe.
Is there any zoological evidence or I guess paleontological evidence of giraffes in Spain?
Europe, not that time period now. So in the hundreds of thousands of years ago, they were giraffes, but not, in tens of thousands of years from the point that this was made.
The dog question. We don't have much time left, sure. But which cave is it that you said you saw these images of domestic dogs? So the question is that word domestic is big. Okay. Sure.
So this is what I'm going to point to two studies. One study was 2012 by a Chinese group, and they said that 32,000 years ago they were indigenous dogs and they were wolves, based on the DNA analysis.
Savolainen et al., I think.
It was a Chinese group, so it was a string of Chinese names. It's 2012. And then 2015, the Skoglund paper, which looked at the Tamar wolf out of Siberia, the wolf was about 34,000 years ago. And he said that roughly at least around 30,000 years ago, there were wolves and there were dogs. Okay. This is what I believe. I believe that we domesticated dogs, not wolves, because the Skoglund story DNA suggests that dogs and wolves, gray wolves, come from a common canid, which was not a gray wolf. So we don't know what it is.
The DNA that was dated was mitochondrial DNA. Correct. And mitochondrial DNA itself, like there's issues with it. Recently, there was a paper published that we talked about in one of our previous podcasts about the dogs on Instagram. That was that same mitochondrial DNA used on horses in the Americas was used to try to prove that horses had always been into the Americas. So like mitochondrial DNA is absolutely a great resource. However, we all should know that these are breadcrumbs and not the whole loaf. So it's fascinating. And right before we get back to the talk about dogs, I want to just suggest for you, Bernie, for cross-cultural comparisons in myths, I highly recommend. It's called Tolkien and Pawnee Land. It's an argument about comparing Tolkien's story of Middle-earth with Pawnee mythology. And then also you should look into the Sami as a cultural comparison to what we see in
Spell Swami. Sami. Spell that.
Yeah.
Spell that word.
Sami, I think it's like Sami.
Yes, yes. The Sami, the people in Northern Europe, yes.
Yes, and they're indigenous populations that have continued hunting and gathering practices since the introduction. So definitely look into those guys. I think that it'd be more valuable to look at them than possibly, other indigenous groups, because they're the descendants of the indigenous groups that lived in Europe. So just something that I wanted to mention. But back to the dog.
Okay, so the question comes down to, do dogs and wolves separately exist? Or were dogs bred from wolves?
So I think with the Skoglund paper, what it's saying is that there's a descendant population, like dogs are an offshoot of ancient wolf populations. And it's not necessarily to say that dogs in the sense that we know them existed. It's just those wolves that were more predisposed to being familiar around humans and less aggressive. That line is what descended into dogs, and that's why they were domesticatable. Is that something you would agree with,
my reading on it, so he didn't go, I don't think he went into what made them domesticatable. And I read your paper, your 2012 paper.
About the different lines.
Yeah, there's five. Yeah. You had 5 different hypotheses. You outlined 5 different hypotheses how dogs came to be.
Sure, and that was a summary of others.
A summary, yeah, and they're all good. They're all good. But if we have 5 hypotheses about how dogs came to be, maybe they're all right. Well, actually, maybe one of them right, or maybe 2 are right. But we're still asking that question. And I think the Chinese study that came out in 2012 that said there were indigenous dogs and there were wolves at the same time. That indigenous dogs then were then domesticated versus the wolves being domesticated. It starts asking questions about, could there have been dogs before? Could dogs have evolved? Could an animal have evolved separately from a wolf that became a dog?
I don't know if that paper exactly says that, but it again says that there are different lines of, there's still gray wolves that exist, just like there are British people that still exist. And as Americans, like, we used to be British in a way, and domestic dogs are an offshoot of those wolves that have now descended down into, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah. So what we have in the images is about, so let's say 34,000 years ago, we have canids with ears down, and we have canids with ears up. And in the modern world, we look at
this is from the panels that you're talking about.
The panels, yeah. And in our modern world, we look at dogs, I should say not wild dogs, but wolves have ears up, right? And there are dogs that are domesticated with ears up, and they're domesticated with the ears down. And so did that down-eared dogs come as a result of us domesticating them, or did it come out a result of something that the dogs did naturally in the wild? And of course, there's the silver fox,
sure.
right? And so what they were doing in Russia or Siberia is they were trying to breed out foxes that were more tame in the kennels, so they didn't wreck the fur, right? Okay. And among a small segment of the population, they found that the puppies, for 3 months, some of them had ears down. And so they postulated that if the ears down might have been a result of taking out the aggressiveness of the foxes.
What you're describing is domestication syndrome. And when an animal, this is what this study shows, is that when things are selected for decreased aggression in their traits, that their ears start to flop down more due to neural crest cells that don't put strength into the cartilage that make them flop down. It also makes their coat spotty, and it makes their, they bark and they have larger puppy, neotenous traits into their adulthood. So that's what that study shows.
So, but it was only for 3 months. That's really important. There was only the puppies for 3 months.
I just saw one of the researchers actually came to Boulder a month or 2 ago and talked to us about this study. So it was out of Moscow during the Soviet Union, and it's at as you mentioned, it's basically a fox breeding facility for fur. However, they got permission to control a subsegment of the fox population. I think they were able to keep max 700 that were specifically meant for this study, and it took, I think, 40 something years for most of the domestic traits to appear.
Well, not domestic traits per se, but they were non-aggressive. You have to say really non-aggressive.
Yeah, so first came the non-aggressive towards humans, as they selectively
Neotenous
chose
is
the
phrase
foxes. So they basically got rid of the foxes that were aggressive towards humans. And I think one of the more fascinating pieces of that study was they were concerned if the mother's behavior towards humans was relayed onto the puppies. So what they did, and this is, you can only do this in Russia.
Sure.
Was they opened up pregnant tame fox and a pregnant wild fox, and they took 3 embryos from each and placed them in the opposite mother, zipped them back up, let them have their puppies, and even still, regardless of which mother they had, they still had the traits of their mother, which I thought was absolutely fascinating.
So David, how many years and how many thousands of dollars do you need to test this hypothesis on wolves? The ears up and ears down.
I would love to do that.
How much?
I guess.
What's crowdfunded?
The money?
Yeah.
40 years in a gulag in Russia.
Yeah, the entire economy of the Soviet Union. But that'd be an interesting study to do. And it's interesting, and you mentioned the thing about like after a couple of months, it changes. The fox experiment's a recent thing with selected controlled breeding. Mm-hmm. So when this happens over thousands of years, upwards of 30,000 to 25 to 15,000 years, if we want to talk conservatively, that gives time for these traits to be bred in persistently. And that's the dogs that we have today. So to say that there were floppy-eared dogs back in the day and painted into cave art, I don't know what the dates are in that. The cave
34,000.
But 34,000?
Yeah. Which is actually in Skoglund's range. That's in Skoglund's range, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify that. And those are images you drew, right?
No, they're not. Actually, I didn't draw them. So the images exist on the wall. I recognize, yeah. And then I outline. And what I always do, and I'm very careful about this, is that I always give the original image to compare to. If you look at most Paleolithic cave art books that predate, let's say, 30 years ago, you'll see a lot of drawings of dogs, or actually not dogs, drawings of Paleolithic cave images, because that predate, good color photography and so on, digital photography. And they'll show you what the archaeologist or the interpreter believe them to be. In fact, I'd say 80% of the Paleolithic cave record is of people's interpretations, either drawings, and they don't show a digital image next to it for the viewer to compare. So I offer both.
What about Lascaux?
So Lascaux was Rispoli did his book probably 25 years ago. Good digital photography. Good, and the Chauvet one by Jean Clot, very good digital photography. But when you go to you go to other caves, it's like a large inventory of the Paleolithic cave images. The decisions were made a very long time ago, and they were made by the Abbey, Bruiel, and Abbey meaning a Catholic priest. And what he did was he actually went down the caves and he drew what he saw. And so many of the decisions that we make based on the Paleolithic record are an individual's interpretation with very old technology. But yeah, sure. Lascaux, very good.
These are all pictures. Yeah, there's all these pictures right now.
All publicly available.
So you're saying
pictures, all publicly available. Yep.
Yeah.
Beforeorion.com, go to the webpage.
No, I'm just
I'm not
asking.
hiding. It's all there.
So you're saying that our interpretations come from this one person, but these things are available online for everyone to see nowadays. And I'm just confused by that. So.
If you go to Wikipedia and you start looking up the caves and you see drawings, most of those were made by the Abbey 60 years ago, the drawings, okay. Yeah.
We are definitely over time. Bernie, this has been great. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Do you have anything that you need to plug for our listeners? What do you want them to go to?
Oh, beforeorion.com webpage. I use hashtag Beforeorion for everything. I give a lot of presentations. I mostly related to archaeoastronomy. Okay. And I also do some Picasso Hero's Journey type of stuff as well. Always welcome to Skype or video conference in. And, it's been an extraordinary experience, and I love the conversation. And if you guys ever want to get out on some non-archaeology podcasts to talk about your stuff, I can hook you up.
Oh, dude, I'm down.
Yeah.
I'm totally down. I like talking.
Yeah.
Well, we'd like to ask our listeners every episode, if you could live your life in ruins. Well, I guess in your case, Bernie, if you could live your life in the Paleolithic rock art caves, would you do it again?
No, I like Costco. I like the freezer.
I do love Costco. It's my most adult thing about me.
I like Netflix. I'm good.
Yeah.
All right.
BeforeOrion.com, is that where they can go?
BeforeOrion.com.
All right. Well, Bernie, thanks again for being on here.
Good stuff.
Welcome back to segment 3 of a Life in Ruins podcast. Bernie will not be joining us for this segment because we have some announcements. So just for our listeners, that was a great interview. Suggest if you listen to Dr. Anderson's episode that came out, episode 11, he mentions read his stuff, read other people's stuff, and then make decisions on your own. Use your brain. I think he has some interesting points.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we will certainly leave links in our show notes to his pages so it's easier for you guys to, as listeners, get in and see where he's coming from.
Because by no means are we predicated on the stance that we're just not going to listen to people who we don't agree with. We want our listeners to know other content that's out there, but it's your responsibility to look into it. So if you find what he says is fascinating, I certainly do, read his work, read his arguments, and then also read the people that he doesn't agree with, and then make your own decision. Don't let people just tell you what to think. So that's your guys' responsibility.
I'm wrong all the time, so don't listen to me ever. But I mean,
so
I cite stuff.
Clearly not, David, because you have about 10,000 followers on ethnocynology now. So people clearly like what you're posting.
Yeah, I actually did just hit a milestone. It's actually the only New Year's resolution I've ever hit in my life, and this is it was such a weird feeling. Do you guys mind if I dish real quick?
Yeah, so also for listeners, we're recording on December 16th. You guys are listening to this January. So David recently hit this. Dude, go into it.
Yeah. So I don't really hit goals ever because that's lame half the time. But I was like, you know what? I really want to do this science outreach thing. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. And I was like, if I just hit 10,000 followers by the end of the year, I'll have done something that I wanted to accomplish. And I did it in December, but I didn't expect it to happen this soon. But anyway, it's on Instagram, 10,000's when you get a creator account, and it's when Facebook realizes you're a money making potential.
You can swipe up, right?
I haven't made any money yet, just so everyone knows. Yeah, you can swipe up in your stories. I do want to clarify, I have not made any money. I don't make any money. I lose money doing this pretty much. It's just I genuinely want to get the information out there. And I do try to cite it all. If it's just an opinion, there's no citation near it. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, I just wanted to thank everyone that listens to this podcast, first of all. And then also by extent, people who follow me on Instagram, maybe that's how you found us. Really appreciate it. You guys wanting to know more things and interacting with me is genuinely one of the best sources of happiness in my life, which kind of sucks because I don't want to base my happiness off Instagram, but it's the thought of the education and people reaching out to me. I've explained evolution to people on through my Instagram that hadn't really thought about it in such a way before, and that really means a lot to me. Just being able to teach. Anyway, sorry, I'm ranting here, but it really means a lot, and I think a lot of you guys probably come from there. To this podcast. So thank you on behalf of Carlton and Connor too. I believe they'd probably agree. Thanks for just being curious and wanting to listen to more about history and prehistory through archaeology.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I want to say, and I bet Carlton will agree with us. We're super proud of you, man. I mean, you work hard to maintain this channel, to maintain these posts, and it's a lot of work, and a lot of people don't see this behind the scenes, how much work you put into that. So you've definitely earned it, man. Coming from me.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I agree. And for our listeners, David puts in his fucking research, and he often asks other people to make sure he's saying what is correct, is what he's saying on there is correct. So, this isn't just him sitting alone in his bedroom, thinking of this stuff. He's actually putting the research into these posts, and he's oftentimes less me and Connor, just word choices and just basic grammatical shit.
Yeah,
and to make sure things are culture.
Yeah, I spelled popes instead of tying the poles on the travois. You tie the popes to the dog's back. I messed that up today, but put that on blast for about 2 hours. First sentence.
That might hurt our Vatican.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, especially hearing it from you guys. It's like means a lot. It's weird not being in academia and just like having an actual job. There's like that weird pressure of like not being a success in like some ways. But then, like, because like your initial success is like being a PhD, being Ross Geller on Friends, you know, like, but he wasn't successful in any way. But doing this is what I wanted to do, what I would do with a PhD anyway. And instead of just talking to a classroom of 30 undergrads, I'm talking to officially 10,000.7 people on a Facebook-owned company. So, yay.
Oh, yeah, man. Heck
Solid.
yeah.
Now time to get the Life in Ruins pod to 10,000.
Yeah, that's next.
You just got to quit that job.
That's next.
You did the 10-7.
Yeah, just now that you hit 10,000 now you just got to stop.
Do you guys have, speaking of podcast, do you guys have anything to say about, you know, the new year? And like, I think this is our first New Year's podcast. So like what, maybe second, either way. It's
second, but
I guess yesterday I turned in my last final for my third semester of being in a PhD program at an R1 institution, which is great. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's like I'm actually got to sleep in today. I'm usually in my office by like 6 o'clock in the morning most days, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I'm up at 5 most days, and I'm like I get everything packed the night before, and I'm in my office at 6, so that way I have time to like get shit done I need to before emails start coming in around 9 o'clock.
That's impressive, man.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's, I don't know. I think my mental health is like a year ago today, I was not in a good place. And as like you guys know, like even before I went to Ukraine, I was still struggling a lot. And like, I think I kind of had a realization the other day that I'm doing much better. Like I realize it that like I'm pretty fucking phenomenal in many of things. Man. So I don't know. So I know 2020 going forward, we get this, got this continuing. Still, I'm starting to get emails actually about the Ukraine trip that I mentioned back in episode 6. People are actually starting to hit me up about it. That student at Radford that listens to us actually Instagram messaged me this morning asking, and I was like, "You need a field school." And then we'll talk. And he's looking into, I told him to start looking into travel grants just in case we don't get the grant we're looking for to fund us to go. But I don't know, that's cool. People know us. I know at the Nebraska State Archaeological Society or whatever, they know of our podcast and they talk about it. And I don't know. I think it's just a confluence of things at the end of this year that's been great.
It's awesome. I've really enjoyed, my personal take on this. Like, I've really enjoyed this podcast. It gives me, as a CRM archaeologist, you kind of fade away from academia periodically. And this gives me that foot in this academic world and gets me excited about archaeology again, because it's hard to stay excited sometimes when you're making maps ad nauseum for months on end. So, and I was in the same way as Carlton. I've gone through some up and down emotional well-being, and you guys have really helped me through that. And I super appreciate you guys. I super appreciate listeners for rating us, reviewing us, talking to us, engaging with us. You guys made this 2019 just fantastic, honestly.
Yeah.
Connor's getting married this year.
He is. A Life in Ruins wedding. Live stream it. One last thing for anyone who is still here. Caleb, Stefan, I think you're on there. Hey, Stefan, you're awesome, man. We really appreciate what you're doing, and we're really excited to have you on here soon. Hey,
go eat your spinach.
Go eat spinach. Guys, Stefan in his YouTube videos, it's like his thing. He puts a little lav mic on a plastic spoon. Frankly, it's adorable and I love it, but it's the funniest thing every time it's on there. I need to start doing that. But anyway.
Well, his name, our listeners don't know who it is. His name's Stefan Milo. We haven't had him on the podcast yet. He will be. He produces some great content, and he's most of the people we know on social media are because of David and ethnocynology. So actually, a lot of the guests we've had, that we don't know personally, it's David.
Just the fixer. No, Chris is the fixer. I'm just the networking New York person. I don't know what the polite word for that is, but for those of you who listen to the podcast, we really appreciate it. We get DMs all the time from you guys. We like on the podcast Instagram and our Instagram, and we just got put on a list of Carlton. What was it? The top 10?
Top 10 science
up-and-coming
podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like you don't listen to, and then it's like parentheses yet. So we got put on that list as number 9, and we are also like, I love can I read the description?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hold on. Let me pull it up. So you say what you need to say. I'm going to pull this up.
Oh, I was going to say with what Bernie was talking about earlier today, the hero's journey thing with Joseph Campbell. Super interesting topic. I'm glad he brought that up. A lot of like mythologies in the world, like Luke Skywalker, or he was mentioning Gilgamesh. They all have these like common themes, and if you don't know that. If you read Joseph Campbell's work, like you'll see that theme in a lot of like at least Western literature and Eastern literature as well. Super dope. Not relevant to anything we were saying. What's up, Stefan?
We love you, Caleb.
Why I brought that up is I'm about to go see Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker on the 20th. And here's the thing, guys. Just because we're podcasting, anybody who doesn't like the new Star Wars movies, like shoot me a DM. Let's talk it out, man. It's still Star Wars. Disney's still making money off you, whether you hate it or love it. You're still writing Disney on the internet. I'm just ranting here, Carlton. You almost done? I love the new Star Wars. What else can I say? All right, good. I'm done talking.
I got it. So it's 10 science podcasts you haven't heard of, parentheses yet, ! By Stephanie Fuccio, I think. Anyways, so there's 10 of these on here. Our podcast art is in the center of this post. I fucking love it. We are ranked as number 9, a Life in Ruins podcast. And this is what the description reads. We have spent quite a bit of time above ground so far in this list, so let's go underground with the help of this archaeological trio. Former classmates from the University of Wyoming, Carlton Gover, voila, Connor Johnen, and David Howe dig into this topic with vigor and humor. In fact, this science podcast almost deserves a comedy category. It's that funny. They are all clearly confident, intelligent, and very good friends, as their archaeological jargon and friendly but teasing banter suggests. And yet we can easily learn heaps about the field through their, and they say, ridiculous stories. A perfect starting episode is episode 6, Eat, Dig, Love, A Summer in the Ukraine. It will ruin you. Out of all the episodes, it's like that one where I'm screaming about jewel pods and arguing with Connor about duck effigies.
Yeah.
Like that's what she's telling people to go listen to. That is by far my least favorite one because I am just sleep deprived. I am angry. Like oh God. So yeah. And she found us through, we had to make a Twitter recently. It's at Life in Ruins Pod.
Plug it.
Yeah, it's at a Life in Ruins Pod, and we only did it for Dr. Anderson, who is episode 11, because
he's got this crazy following, and we were like, follow, share, retweet us.
So we'll do that, and he just retweeted us. He didn't make a post. Thanks, Dr. Anderson. And so we made it for that, but it just happened to coincide with this author looking up things, and she saw the retweet from Dr. Anderson and like went out of her way to listen. Didn't even listen to his episode. Listen to fucking Eat, Pray, Dig, Ukraine.
My mom listened to that one. Mom, I know you're listening right now. Sorry, I'm throwing you right under the bus, directly under the big yellow school bus. But she's like, you guys curse too much in that one. And I'm like, well, we curse. She said we curse too much and we're unprofessional, which I mean, we are. That's like our thing. But Mom, I made a list. And not that kind of list. I made this list.
And I love how because the episode that we recorded directly before this, so episode 13, the real episode 13, we recorded just before this episode because we're going out for break. So we've done like 3 hours of fucking podcasting today. And even Chris, he doesn't cuss on any of his podcasts, but because we have that explicit label, I noticed like he was cussing a lot. I was like, yes, he's just like, he can't do this on his own shows.
All right. Well, what's...
Bernie didn't curse though. Bernie was an adult, and
Bernie was great. That was a great interview.
Yeah, very intelligent.
And like for our listeners, we kind of almost thought we weren't going to interview him. We had like a brief email dialogue to like make sure like we knew what we were talking about because Bernie has some interesting ideas that don't, as I think as our listeners know, you wouldn't expect us to have him on, but he reached out to us.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to silence him. We were like, let's talk about it. Like, we've actually put a lot of research into his episodes. Like David with the dog stuff, we were looking up caves, like we were looking up all this other stuff because we're like, we need to have a conversation with him where we can actually like talk with him and like, just to make sure that we knew what he was talking about and that we could offer other ideas or just engage with him. So we put a lot of time into those first 2 segments.
Yeah. Thanks for being on, Bernie.
All right. This is the end of episode 14 finally, right? We there? 14?
14. I don't know why I said that. Anyway.
14. Shorts? Is that what that means?
Nope. Matt means 14.
Oh, right. What is shorts?
Pantalones cortos.
Yeah, pantalones. I was thinking of the cortos part.
He doesn't say cortos, but yeah.
Soy stupido.
Okay, pues. Es el fin de la... I'm done. It's the end of this episode. I don't think any of us... Attore, you listen to this one. You don't speak Spanish, though, so never mind. So it would not work.
Dude, he speaks Japanese.
No. Oh, yeah. So, fun fact. Oh, here's our last little tidbit for the end of the year episode. Chris, I'm sorry. We're so over on this one. I'm so sorry. Carlton thought that when I said Attore, he thought I was saying Hattori, as in Hattori Hanzo from Kill Bill. And I did not know that Attore, who lives in Italy, Northern Italy, listens to our podcast. He speaks very good English, actually better than I do. And in the email, he's actually making our new podcast art, which is amazing, by the way. And in the email signature of his, he said greetings from Japan. And I was at work and died because that means not only is he funny as hell, he listened to the whole podcast and heard us just butcher his name and nationality.
He heard me say, eat the spaghetti.
Yeah, see, not a good look, man. We can't do that. Anyway,
oh my god. Yeah. So
thank you, Bernie. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Connor, thank you. I thank you both for being on here.
Yeah, man. Thank you and everything that we do. Yeah. This is great. When do we don't record? Fuck you.
Yeah, fuck you, Carlton.
When do we record again?
Sorry,
we don't
Mom.
record again until like January.
Oh, I'm off the hook, dude. I'm watching Star Wars like 8 times.
I know, dude. I'm watching it with my person. She's never seen Star Wars, so I got fucking like 10, probably like 16 hours worth of Star Wars to watch with her before we see that.
Do the machete order if she's never seen it.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was planning on. To be like, how does this Rogue have they?
Speaking of the hero's journey,
Rogue and Rogue, the whatever Star Wars Rogue One and a Solo. Have they added those yet?
On Disney Plus? They're on Netflix, both of those.
No, I know that, but in terms of like the order that you're supposed to watch Star Wars.
Oh yeah, so machete order. If you do it this way, it's the order for getting the correct rise and fall of Anakin, which is like the saga. You watch A New Hope, then you watch The Empire Strikes Back, and you find out that he's the father, or Vader is. And then you go back and watch episode 2 and 3. You negate 1 because why? And then you watch right there. You can watch Rogue One, and then you can watch Solo. And then you watch Return of the Jedi. But the actual order is 4, 5, 2, 3, and then 6. 6 picks the whole hero's journey of Luke Skywalker and Anakin Skywalker, and it comes to a poetic end. But I guess not, because now the Emperor is back a lot. I interrupted. Sorry, I love Star Wars. We are actually over our 3rd segment now. Carlton, I'm done. Finish it off.
Sweet. So, we asked Bernie if I don't think he got the joke, but I think he answered well. He likes Costco. I like Costco.
I love Costco.
14.
Yeah, I guess that's, yep, that's episode 14. Jesus. It feels like we've been doing this a lot longer, but we started recording back in March is when we first recorded.
Yeah.
We recorded in April, right? Yeah, we had it recorded in April. The podcast didn't come out until May because no, dude.
Quiet.
Because I remember I was writing my comps.
Quiet.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I'm putting 3 minutes in the end there. No, I think we're over. I've talked enough. Connor, take us out.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer. So this time, instead of a shitty Connor joke, we're going to get some funny podcast writing from Robbie Slowick, at Robbie Slowick, ROBBYSLOWIK on Twitter. He writes, I'm going to read some of his latest podcast-themed erotica. I slowly remove
Jesus Christ.
your blue apron. I see you're not wearing any MeUndies. And I reach for your Squarespace.
Oh my God. None of those people. Oh my God.
Jesus.
Thank you for that, Connor. All right, everybody. We're out.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.